Hello and welcome back to 3 Lessons from Breakthrough Leaders. I'm Zana Ryabchuk, MD at Breakthrough Global.
And I'm Dr. Bart Sale, Breakthrough CEO and founder. We've spent 30 years developing the Breakthrough methodology to transform companies who want to reach their highest level.
And in this podcast, we'll get to the heart of that transformation, meeting leaders and creative talents to share 3 lessons that we guarantee will help you and your companies to unleash your potential. And Bart and I will take a moment to analyse the key takeaways and opportunities for breakthrough thinking.
In today's episode, we'll learn from a true pioneer in consumer innovation, Dr. Tim Moore. Tim is Executive Vice President, Shark Robotics at SharkNinja. And previously, as VP Innovation and CTO for GHD, Tim led and built their world-class laboratory facilities.
And today we'll hear these 3 lessons from Tim. Innovate or fade away.
You as a business serve your customers. In the aristocratic world, they forget that and they start thinking, actually, we know best. We know what you want. And you can sort of see some of the, companies that have gone up to being aristocratic. The classic ones always use people like Kodak and look what's happened to them now.
Hold your success close, your failure closer.
I think what Breakthrough did for me was subtly in the way that you kind of think about your mindset. That was the moment where, for me, it was the aha moment.
Why momentum matters.
Actually, if you sit back, take a moment, think it through, follow a bit of process, it doesn't mean that issue will get fixed in the next 2 hours, but it's now you've had more chance to really think about it. And that's almost, it's like, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the big friendly letters, don't panic. It is that kind of mantra you need in the crisis environment. It's like, stand back. The wheels will not fall off because you've got momentum.
Lesson 1, barbarians and bureaucrats. Innovation to me is what I call a fat word, something that has so many different meanings. If you were to Google innovation, I don't know how many hits you would get. It's going to be in the millions. So I'd like to start off with your view of, or your definition of what innovation is, and particularly commercial innovation.
For me, innovation is literally doing something which hasn't been done before. And that could be a product, it could be a technology, it could be a business method, or it could be a combination of these things. It could be combining aspects of one other industry, another business model, etc., to create something new and innovative. So for me, purely innovation has to be something literally, the world hasn't seen or experienced before. And I take that kind of definition from the days of when I was doing my PhD, where in order to pass your PhD, you had to actually discover something that the world had not seen before. There are different types of innovation. So the way we think of things here and in the past is subdividing that innovation into sort of kind of like 3 categories. One is what we call news. So it's more basic innovation, as it were. So it might be something, when we say it's new to the market, it might be something like a change in a product world, it might be a new design or shape. So it might not be something sort of like earth-shattering that sort of challenges the laws of physics. Then we have new. And new is where we'd call you're adding technologies together to create something new. And then you have breakthrough, which is the ones where you really are, you're challenging the laws of the universe. It's a completely new way of doing things, a completely new business model. It might be, completely new technology that you're feeding into a product.
That's great. And that's a really good set of distinctions that people can work with. You've been in this field for some time now. How has it changed the area of commerce and innovation?
It's a lot faster than it used to be. So, when I first started out, the internet was just beginning. If you didn't know what you wanted then, and you wanted to know the information quickly, you might have to use the fax machine or what was known as a bulletin board over the computer. So and if they didn't have the information, then you literally had to wait 2 days for it to turn up in the post to get the data sheet. So design and development was a lot slower. Today, all of that information is instantaneously available. There is also a lot more componentization, particularly in electronics. So you don't have to design and build down to scratch. You can actually just build on the building blocks that have already been created. And that means that, again, you can go much faster, but you can also develop things, very, very complex things on much, much tighter budgets than used to do in the past.
So, Tim, what for you makes a company innovative versus a company that isn't as innovative or isn't innovative at all?
For me, it's the leadership, which then distills right the way through the organization. So it always feeds back to mindset for me and the way that provides right the way through the organization. And I've experienced what happens to organizations because, typically I tend to stay at companies for 10-year batches. So in that time, you tend to experience a variety of, particularly in the private equity world, where your business is owned by the private equity, you tend to experience a change of CEOs or whatever. So you kind of experience what happens. One of the things that really helped me in understanding what was going on is some of the stuff that Lawrence Miller did on sort of barbarians to bureaucrats. So this idea that you can sort of think of, this life cycle of a business as going from, profit at the startup where you have, the visionary person there who's just, all about driving as the visionary leader, perhaps maybe not the greatest at delivery, but, very much in the magical thinking world. Then as the company develops, you move into the barbaric or barbarian phase where you haven't got the processes, things are all a bit crazy, but you're growing like stink. Everything's all about crisis management. And it's the point of time of the hero manager or the hero developer who takes everything. And then gradually, as you move out of that, you move into the builder explorer phase where maturity starts to set in. I start thinking the company's beginning to act more like a 20-year-old rather than a recalcitrant teenager. And at that point, you start building the business, so building capabilities. So, in a product business, that means getting better and better at productionization, the processes that lead up to it, the processes of innovation themselves. And then Explorer, where you're going out and you're building your markets, you're expanding out literally, think of Magellan and all that lot, you're moving out to different markets. And then over, as you keep them going, you become more administrative. So you get better at doing that, become a bit more mature. Things might start to slow down. And the trick is, once you get up to Builder Explorer and you will naturally move over to Administrator, is to then keep that cycle going of bashing between the two. Because otherwise, if you carry on going on Administrator, you become bureaucratic and you start believing that everybody else, you're the best in the world and nobody else knows what they're talking about. And ultimately, you become aristocratic, which is where you forget actually you as a business serve your customers. In the consumer world, at the end of the day, it's consumer, what they think. And in the aristocratic world, they forget that and they start thinking, actually, we know best. We know what you want. Here it is. And you can sort of see some of the companies that have gone up to being aristocratic. The classic ones always uses people like Kodak and stuff like that. And look what's happened to them now.
It was fascinating to hear Tim talk about leadership and the mindset of leadership and how absolutely critical that is to successful innovation. And I find that whole concept and journey of the idea of barbarians to bureaucrats just so fascinating as well.
Me too. I liked the example with Kodak as well. It's a classic example, but it's very illustrative. And in Breakthrough, we have the concept of performance zones. And Kodak, which had a high performance culture in its heyday, went gradually, roll by roll, to a complacent culture and stopped performing. It started looking inward. It no longer innovated. And now where is it? Yet Kodak was the first company to invent a consumer digital camera.
Incredible. And it's just so shocking that they completely missed that future. I think it illustrates Tim's point perfectly. You don't want to end up as the aristocrats. Okay, on to the next lesson.
Lesson 2, the innovation mindset.
Do you want to maybe share with our listeners the work that we were doing with you and why it particularly struck a chord, what it was about the breakthrough mindset that seemed to reignite something in you?
But breakthrough for me came along at the right time. I was part of a really good, very, very strong sort of UK-based brand. And gradually as we grew as an organization and became more mature as an organization, it was in that process, I kind of felt like we were beginning to lose some of what made us special as an organization. And I think what Breakthrough did for me was suddenly, in the way that you kind of think about your mindset, that was the moment where, for me, it was the aha moment, because I think I was certainly getting gradually more and more cynical. And then what Breakthrough did with the mindsets of basically thinking through magical thinking and then heroic action, for me, really summed up what it was like in the early days of being in that organization and what made it special and great. And then indeed what it's like here now today, where I'm at the moment in Shark. And it was just the way of just pulling back. You just cannot outperform your mindset. And I'd actually got to a point where my mindset was actually impacting my performance. And so I'd actually leveled my performance in what I was doing as a manager, as a guy developing products, all of that kind of stuff, had actually leveled. And dare I say, it started going down. I was actually getting worse. I felt myself, I was going backwards. And suddenly this way of articulating mindset, you can't outperform your mindset, and then really bringing yourself down, having the tools to bring yourself back into magical and heroic, for me was a massive opener, absolute winner.
Continuing with this, for you, what are the cultural influences or barriers on becoming more innovative as an individual or as a company?
Fear of failure, I think, is number one. And in consumer products, we have actually very tight and strict timescales. So you've got to deliver against them for retail and all that kind of good stuff. So you cannot play with that. So you have to set up an environment where that will still work. That's what I call commercial development. The fast lane, that's literally where failure cannot be supported lane. But then you've got to have a parallel lane, which you call the technology validation lane, as it were, where you can support failure. And in fact, in many ways, failure is a good thing, particularly if you fail fast and then don't repeat. And that's what you've got to set up. I think you've got to do that. So there's a fear of failure, and then putting people in a place where actually they will ultimately fail. So you don't want to do that. So split it up into development. Two things to drive the culture. Commercial development, where it's very, very hard, very operational focused, get stuff done. Parallel track that with the technology validation line. And then set up the systems so that you're in a funnel, what I call a funnel to tunnel approach. So you can have lots of ideas for innovation in there. And ultimately, that's got to be whittled down relatively quickly, particularly in a commercial environment, to something which then goes into what I call the tunnel, which is when you deliver it. Tunnel being the commercial development. And then to really get people thinking and joining the dots, it's a question then of putting in programs so that you can get, people can try things out. And if it doesn't work, forget about it, move on, try something else. And they don't feel that they've failed. And it's those kind of tools, I think, that can then really shift that mindset into where you want it to be, which is both magical and heroic. And those two streams I was talking about literally kind of mirror that. You've got the magical thinking and the technical validation stream. We call it technical validation because we don't want to make it too magical, because otherwise it will just go off into the blue skies and never be seen again. And what's the point of that? But you call it technical validation because you know that there's got to be an end to what you're doing. And then you've got the heroic delivery, as it were, which is the commercial stream. And you kind of base the thinking around that. So you then, the natural system of the way that you're operating helps develop the mindset.
Again, going back to my experience, I was in innovation. I was in R&D with a number of companies, including Unilever. And I can remember going back to those times that we had an enormous number of PhDs and graduates and so on. And one of the things I remember from that was that it was very easy to start projects, but it was very difficult to stop them.
And then that's why I always refer to it as technology validation, because it's like it naturally in itself says there is an end to this. I've come up with an idea and I'm going to validate it. Of course, the moment you say technology validation, okay, validation against what? And that's when you can then start driving actually consumer need. What is it that the consumer wants and needs? And that's the other part of the kind of innovation story that I think you have to get right. So obviously we've spoken about the technical side. The other side that you've got to in the metric, as it were, is marketing, the need, the want. And one of the things that we do, and I've done at various companies now, is this what I call Spark, or you could call it whatever you want, where you get every so often, every quarter or whatever time you want to do, you literally get all together, the marketeers and salespeople, and you get the techies together in a room. And the techies will present some ideas and stuff like that. Marketing will present, this is the market need, this is what we want, and ideas that if we could wave a magic wand, we might be able to create. Don't have to be fully technical bait. But then what you're looking for is that magical crossing point where someone's got a technology that answers a problem, or there's a problem which can be solved with a technology. But what it does is it instills in everybody in the room something in the back of their mind. It plants seeds. So when they go away and do their normal job, somebody in marketing will go, oh, I've just come across this. Hang on a moment. Didn't I see a technology the other day for that? And vice versa. A techie sort of like reading through, electronics magazine or whatever, and suddenly sees a new technology and suddenly thinks, ooh, wouldn't that be able to answer this market need? And that's what you're looking for. And what you tend to find is as you run this process for longer, after about a year, you're getting too much innovation. Your funnel is so full that the problem is now moving to the next stage, which is actually joining all the dots to actually create something really, really good. But yeah, I find that kind of spark process, that linking together, is absolutely key. And it also helps buy in a product or a concept right from the start, right from the birth of it, because marketing, development, etc. were there at the start.
So it's great to hear Tim talk about his awareness that it was mindset that was in the way and that had blocked him. And this is so important for everybody, because you cannot outperform your mindset. And as far as innovation is concerned, you cannot out-innovate your mindset. And if you're a company, then your culture is the collective mindset. I remember when I was in Unilever running innovation, one of the insights I had then, which probably wouldn't be an insight now, but then the insight was that our inability to increase our innovation, our capability of innovation, our capacity for innovation, was basically our culture. Our culture was a glass ceiling on our ability to innovate. And what we had to do is find a way to break through that glass ceiling. In fact, that was the start of the breakthrough process, the breakthrough methodology. It was breaking through that glass ceiling. And really, every company comes up against a glass ceiling at some point when it's talking about growth and innovation. And it needs to find its ways to break through that glass ceiling. Otherwise, it won't grow. It won't innovate.
And I think it's key that Tim brings into that the idea of needing to fail and having a great culture where failure is expected, anticipated, and just part of the way that innovation is done. Because you're not going to grow unless you have a process of trial and error and you take some measured risks. And we see that this can be a real hindrance to many of our clients when they get stuck in a fear of failure. Right, on to Tim's next lesson.
Lesson 3, you've always got time.
So Tim, I'd like to go back a little bit now and just think about when you were a kid and what got you excited in science.
What got me excited in science? I think it was just about doing things and making stuff happen. I mean, it was, what did I used to do back then? It was sort of like the little petrol engine model aircraft and that kind of things. And I would actually, as a kid, I'd have sort of like some crazy ideas of going to try and invent things and create things and build things. I think it was that suddenly as I grew up and got older and it was suddenly just finding that you could, using wires, batteries and various other things, you could build stuff like radios, or you could, control something, and I guess it was just that power that suddenly just really attracted me to just sort of, the whole science and understanding why could you do it, and be, wow, I can actually take this science and I can go and do something really useful with it. And I've always had a passion for product. I've always been in consumer electronics products in one way or another.
And what would your advice be to maybe one of our listeners who is just starting out in their R&D career?
Go for it. Just think magically. And as I say, when it's looking like it's not going to work, drop it like a hot potato and go on, but be persistent.
So, Tim, thinking about your learnings, can you think back to a really influential leader early in your life? Maybe it was in your first career, maybe it was at school, who had a profound impact on you, and what it was about their qualities that have stuck with you in your own leadership?
I used to do, not anymore now, I used to do a fair amount of gliding. And when you're learning to glide, one of the things you learn is you've actually got more time than you think. So if something really catastrophic happens, I remember one time I was being towed up by the tow plane, and I was still learning. The instructor was behind me, and the engine stalled on the tow plane. And the instructor behind me was very, very calm and collected, and he said, "Right, could you tell me what's happening?" We went through these checks of looking at the instruments, looking outside, looking at what was happening and stuff like that. And eventually we came to the conclusion that we'd probably best unhook ourselves from the tow plane, to let the guy sort himself out and carry on gliding, which is what we did. And staggeringly, I still remember we unhooked, and I just watched this plane just suddenly put himself into a dive so he could restart his propeller, which he did. But the thing was, as the instructor said to me at the time, he said, "Well, what did you learn from that?" I said, "Well, immediately, I said, I should be a lot more observant." And he said, "Yeah, sure." But he said, "Actually, you've got time. You've got time to think. No matter how stressful you think the situation is, you have always got time to think. And actually, if you don't think, the situation will be a lot more dangerous for you." And yeah, I've carried that through. Even falling out of like corkscrew stalls and stuff like that, you've got time to think. Don't panic, because sometimes businesses are in crisis mode and there's an awful lot going on. And there's lots of crises happening. You take the short-term fix to get it done, get the problem fixed, off the table, on to the next. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you've actually fixed the problem. What it means is you fix the short-term issue, but the actual root cause is still there. But actually, if you sit back, take a moment, think it through, follow a bit of process, it doesn't mean that issue will get fixed in the next 2 hours. It probably means that issue will get fixed in 24 hours or a bit longer. But it's now you've had more chance to really think about it. And that's almost, it's like, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the big friend of letters, don't panic. It is that kind of mantra you need in the crisis environment. It's like, stand back. The wheels will not fall off because you've got momentum, at the end of the day, in most of these businesses.
Tim's lesson that you've always got time has actually stuck with me so much over the last few months. It's really come back to me time and time again, personally and professionally, and that vision of Tim gliding just keeps seeming to re-emerge in my consciousness. And I think it's been particularly prevalent when I've been talking with clients. We have so many people who are living their life in the crisis mode at the moment. It's an absolute struggle for them to break out of this vicious cycle of feeling like they simply do not have time to either resolve the issues that are causing them so much problem, resolve them properly so that they don't keep rearing up time and time again and, just kind of plastering over stuff and hoping it will tide them over to the next crisis. But also it's stopping them from looking at the future and creating the amazing new futures that are going to help them to succeed for many, many years to come.
That's so true, Zana. And thinking about leadership, and for our listeners, if you're leading a team or leading a group or leading an organization, as a leader, you've always got to have two conversations in your mind. There's the conversation about now, which can deal with the crises, the urgent, and so on. But there's another conversation, which is the conversation about the future. And you need to be having both of those conversations constantly. You need to be dealing with the present and what comes up and what shows up, but you also need to be stretching out and planning the future and planning your bridge to that future.
So now we are going to move on to the breakthrough hot seat questions. Are you ready for the hot seat questions, Tim?
Go for it.
Okay, what's the most exciting thing you've ever done?
Flying upside down. I was doing a loop, and well, 2 loops actually. It was at the gliding club I used to go to. There was a wedding on in the sort of like the little hall, over the way, and I was still learning at the time. The instructor behind me said, "Do you want to show off to a whole load of people?" And I said, "Yeah, okay, fantastic." So we went up to like 2,500 feet, and then he said, "We're going to do a loop," and I said, "You're going to fly it?" And I thought, "Wow." And he said, "Right, we're going to nosedive all the guests." And so we put it into a nosedive, went flying down like that. Of course, the guiding speeds up, start screaming. So everybody starts looking up, and you can see them all looking up. And that's when you pull back on the stick and you go up and down and fly upside down and do a loop. And it's absolutely brilliant. And it's showing off.
Making me dizzy just thinking about it. Oh my goodness! Wow.
Total show off.
That's
what
incredible.
inspires you in everyday life?
Ingenuity of people, particularly when something bad happens. We're going to need it for climate change, that ingenuity, but I'm always impressed by the fact that we as human beings, we adapt, we change, and we fix stuff. And there's a whole bunch of us who just do that. So yeah, that inspires me.
And if you could only take one book to a deserted island, what would it be?
Yeah. So weirdly enough, actually, I'm dyslexic, so I tend not to read that many books. But when I do, I get stuck in them and just read them like from cover to cover. I get really quite obsessed with it. I don't know why. But anyway, that's how it works. The latest book where that happened to me, this book made me really at times sweaty, because having been in startups, having sold businesses and stuff like that, there was just times when I was reading this book, I thought, oh my God, this is really, really bad. And that is Bad Blood: Secrets and Lies in a Silicon Valley Startup, about Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. And, this whole culture of fake it until you make it, and for me, this is like magical thinking that's completely unchecked, with no heroic action attached to it whatsoever. And what happens and how they just, I don't think, there's all sorts of people saying it's fraud, but it didn't start off like that. It actually just started off on this solid belief that you could just will something into being, and even if the laws of physics didn't allow it, you could still will it into being. And just following that until actually this horrendous end, and this very unfortunate end. But wow, reading that book, certainly at times, it kind of like I couldn't leave it. I was transfixed by it. Yeah, great book.
By the way, I love Bad Blood as well. And have you seen the HBO documentary of it?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Oh my God, yeah, because that puts the real people in there. It's incredible. Yeah. Thanks so much, Tim. This has been brilliant.
Well, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode. Do make sure you hit the subscribe button and join us next time for another 3 lessons from Breakthrough Leaders. You can reach out to us at Breakthrough Global on LinkedIn or Facebook, via Twitter at Radiant Clarity, or Instagram at Global Breakthrough.
And we'd love to hear your feedback and your own leadership stories. We'd also love for you to share this episode on your own social media and review and rate this podcast on your player of choice, as we want to spread these transformative lessons as wide as possible.
And thanks to our production team, Yulia Schultes over at Breakthrough Global and Robin Lieburn at Fairly Media. And of course, thank you for listening. See you next time.
Bye.